Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome once again. It is our custom to, at this point, to go around and introduce ourselves, and then I'll introduce the speaker. After that, of course, we'll have a half-hour social. So let me begin by introducing myself. Oswaldo.
And Pat.
My name is Henry.
My name is Janae.
I'm Michael.
My name is Prasada Cheta.
My name is Harley.
I'm Alex.
My name is Mel. Ken.
Jose.
Tom. My name is Jerry.
I'm John.
My name is David.
My name is Richard.
My name is Michael.
I'm Jack.
My name is Cass.
Vince. My name is Brad.
I'm Dean.
I'm Harvey.
My name is Brian.
I'm Al.
My name is Roy.
And is there anyone here for the first time? I know there's at least one person. So let's make sure that we say hello to our new members here. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Moon. Tom has been a practitioner of Vipassana for the last 15 years. His spiritual home is at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He's a psychologist in San Francisco, and his chief commitment is to blend the practices of psychology and Buddhism. So welcome once again, Tom.
Thank you. Good morning. What I'd like to talk about today is the practice of forgiveness. It's the same thing I talked about last time I was here, so if you were here, I'm sorry. It's kind of a rerun, but I got some new stuff. So. Thank you. It's really three practices, if you think about it. I mean, there's forgiving other people who've harmed me. There is being open to or seeking out forgiveness for people I've harmed. And then there's the practice of forgiving myself for any way may have been unskillful toward myself. Today I just want to talk about the practice of forgiving others, just because we don't have enough time to do it all. And I want to talk about it from the standpoint of what the Buddha said, and also what psychological research has to say about forgiveness. The Buddha, there's a famous simile that the Buddha used. He said that holding on to resentment or ill will is a little like picking up a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at somebody else. You're the one who gets burned. So immediately what he points out is that ill will, hatred, grudges, resentments hurt. They cause suffering for the person who harbors them. And he meant this in a pretty radical way. I mean, there's a famous, in one of the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, the simile of the saw. He uses a famous simile. Here's what he says. Monks, even if bandits were to savagely sever you, limb by limb, with a double-handled saw, even then, whoever of you harbors ill will at heart would not be upholding my teaching. So if guys are doing this, cutting off your legs, doesn't mean you have the right to cop an attitude, Monks, even in such a situation, you should train yourself thus. Neither shall our minds be affected by this, nor for this matter shall we give vent to evil words, but we shall remain full of concern and pity with a mind of love, and we shall not give in to hatred. We shall live projecting thoughts of universal love to those very persons making them, as well as the whole world, the object of our thoughts of universal love, thoughts that have grown great, exalted, and measureless. We shall dwell radiating these thoughts which are void of hostility and ill will. It is in this way, monks, that you should train yourselves. So there's not a lot of wiggle room there, for righteous indignation or justifiable outrage, right? It's pretty radical. So it's a safe bet that the Buddha was pro-forgiveness. But one of the interesting things is that in most of the literature that has come down to us, at least in the Pali Canon, he hardly ever mentions forgiveness, which is kind of interesting. And the reason that might be true is it can be found in one place where he does mention it. In one of the Mahayana sutras, the story goes that he was sitting under a tree with his monks when a guy approached who was really angry with him. They probably thought he was an atheist or a liberal or something. And he spat in the Buddha's face. And all the monks are sitting around there, and the Buddha just calmly wipes it away without any anger or animosity and just said, "What's next?" So the man was expecting a combative response, and when he didn't get it, he was confused and he ran away. And then the guilt began to eat at him for doing this to a holy man all day long. And so the next day, he came back, and this time he prostrated himself at the Buddha's feet and begged him to forgive him. So this is the Buddha's response. "Forgive you for what? The man you spit upon is gone. Men are like rivers, changing from moment to moment. The river has flowed much since yesterday, and though I may look the same, I am not. Likewise, neither are you the man who came to spit upon me. That man was angry, upset. This man before me bows at my feet, is open, willing. So there is nothing to forgive. Those two men, the one who spit and the one on whom he spit, are no more." Kind of cool. So his deep understanding of impermanence leads to a mind which is kind of like Teflon for resentments. They just didn't stick to him. Which I think explains one of the reasons that he probably didn't talk about forgiveness much. It wasn't a practice he needed, because he already lived in the benefits of forgiveness, an open heart that evicted no one, and the peace of compassion and non-harming. So, but for those of us who's like me, whose minds are a little bit more like Velcro for resentments, then the practice is needed, because once it sticks to you, then what do you, the practice of forgiveness is then about letting go. In psychology, there's actually a lot of stuff about forgiveness. There's a lot of research. There's more than 1,200 published studies, some of them done down in Stanford. And they consistently show that people who are forgiving tend to have not only less stress, but also better relationships, fewer general health problems, and lower incidences of the most serious illnesses, including depression, heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And why is that? It seems that forgiveness works in part by reducing the caustic effects of being unforgiving. The toxic brew of anger, bitterness, hatred, resentment, and fear of being hurt again. The toxic brew of anger, bitterness, hatred, resentment, and fear of being hurt again. The harmful effects of these negative emotions include increased blood pressure, adrenaline, and cortisol levels, which have been linked to cardiovascular disease, immune suppression, and possibly impaired neurological function and memory. A related reason why forgiveness may be good for your health is that studies show that people with strong social supports, social networks, tend to be healthier than loners. But people who are angry and remember every slight are likely probably to lose relationships over the course of a lifetime. So that those who are forgiving are more likely to attract and keep a strong support system, which has multiple health effects. So that's interesting, I think, and it's intuitively sensible, I think, we all know that to hold on to a resentment or a grudge is painful, right? That anyone can look inside and know that that is a form of suffering. However justified we feel we are, it's not fun. And that forgiving, when you actually can genuinely forgive, not just go through the motions, but really let go, there's a lightness. There's something sweet about it. So that it seems that if you want to move toward less suffering, then it would be logical to develop a forgiving heart, right? And conversely, you could say that being unforgiving is self-destructive behavior, or in the Buddha's words, unskillful means. So then the question might arise, well, why don't we all just do it? I've been a therapist for 30 years, and it's been kind of inspiring to see how some people who've really been through just horrendous abuse and neglect, when they do go through their process of recovery from their traumas and tell their stories and work it all through, often a spontaneous and natural forgiveness just arises by itself, right? And it's inspiring to see that this is a capacity of the human heart to do. But I don't, in my experience, that's not what happens in the majority of cases. What I generally hear is people, they recover, but then if I bring up the issue of forgiveness, some people are actually resentful. Why should I forgive that person? Not going to do that. There's sort of, and even an indignation at the very idea. So I think one of the reasons we tend to be like that may have to do with wrong understanding, I guess. Right understanding of forgiveness, of what forgiveness really is probably not so common. So there are several common misconceptions about it, and I wrote about 4 of them down. One of the most common misconceptions is that being forgiving is powerful, that you're in a powerful state if you're angry and armored. It's a powerful emotion, it's strong, and it may make us feel safe and in control. Many believe that we somehow protect ourselves from harm by holding on to anger. So this is something to explore in practice. Is that really true? Does it really make us safer? Because there's often a feeling that to forgive would be to leave yourself wide open to the dangers of the world. What I see is that when people do this, what we're doing is just leaving our wounds open. There's a bottomless, self-righteous rage that we can feel when we're mired in victimization that feels anything but powerful. So there are experiences, we've all experienced, had experiences of being victimized, but when that congeals into a solid identity, a victim, capital V, that can be, that is, I believe, an identity which leads only to suffering. And I think that those who are caught in that mind state are invariably imprisoned in their own private hells. I sometimes say going through life holding resentments is like trying to run a marathon while holding a bowling ball. It weighs us down. So that's one. The second common misconception about forgiveness is that holding on to resentments punishes other people. This is interesting. Many people won't forgive a wrong that was done to them years ago because they'll say, I'm not going to let him or her off the hook, as if this person is somewhere on a hook. They may be living on the other side of the country now, they may be long dead, but they're on the hook, and if I forgive them, then they're suffering somehow because I'm mad, and they will stop suffering, the deserved suffering, if I let them off the hook. leads back to that little simile of the coal again, picking up the coal, the hot coal to throw at others hurts me. What it does to other people, who can say? Probably nothing. A third misconception is that forgiveness means condoning bad behavior. So this is an important one because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean denying that real offenses may have been committed. All it is a deliberate decision to let go of the past and to release feelings of resentment or vengeance or the temptations of vengeance toward those who've harmed us, regardless of whether we think they actually deserve it. So it doesn't mean condoning or minimizing bad behavior. And what we do is we forgive actors, not actions. Assaulting me was bad behavior, but I can forgive you. Right? That's important. The fourth one that is also very important, I think, is that the idea that if I forgive you, I have to let you back in my life. If I forgive you, we have to be friends again, and I don't want to. This is a misconception because it conflates forgiveness and reconciliation, which are very different things. It's usually a lot easier to forgive a wrong if the perpetrator apologizes, but letting go of resentment and vengefulness is still something I can do completely on my own, by myself, whether or not the other person even knows I'm doing it. Because it's simply an exercise in letting go of the past. But reconciliation is about committing to a future with the other person. So it's not just letting go of the past, it's committing to a future. And in order to do that, in order to do that genuinely, there has to be some return to an amicable state and to basic trust. And sometimes I can forgive, but recognize if I let you back into my life, you're liable to do the same thing all over again. And so I can't do it. In other words, forgiving doesn't mean being a damn fool. It doesn't mean being, I'm so spiritual that I forgive and all problems are gone. And, I don't ever take reasonable action to protect myself. Not armoring myself in resentment, but taking appropriate action to protect myself. The story that I like the most about this that illustrates this difference between forgiveness and reconciliation is a woman who was being beaten up regularly by her live-in boyfriend. And so after a lot of help from friends and the police, she managed to get his sorry ass thrown out of the house. And she was a very dedicated practitioner, so a year later she was able to say, truthfully, I have forgiven him. My heart is open to him. But the front door is locked. Right? So that's important to understand. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. So these thoughts, I think, all fall into the category of right understanding. And there are a few other things as well. See, I wrote it out a few. Forgiving requires the maturity to accept some uncomfortable truths, mainly that the past can never be changed, that another person's hurtful actions can never be undone, and that the people who wronged us may never see the error of their ways. Jack Kornfield puts it this way. He says, he says, we have to give up all hope of ever having a better past. I like that. Because we do have to, you can probably see this in your own life. We struggle with our pasts as if they could be different. And it also helps to see the big picture. It's easy to form solid identities around our suffering, my victimhood, but every life includes experiences of hurt and betrayal. If you think about it, right? I mean, how many people have never been hurt or betrayed by another human being? Raise your hand. You know? Nobody's going to raise their hand. So it's the inevitable price of being a human being. And in this sense, your pain is not yours, it's the pain of humanity. And when we see it in this way, you can use your pain no longer to separate you from other people, but connects you. But it can connect you through the experience of compassion. So those are some thoughts. And I think that that's the first step in forgiving is right understanding. There are three steps, I think, in doing forgiveness practice. So the first is right understanding. The second is right intention. You have to decide that you're going to forgive. It has to be a conscious intention most of the time. I mean, as I said earlier, sometimes it arises spontaneously. But usually we have to say, I want to do this. And I want to do this on the basis of the fact that I realize if I do this, I'll feel better. So first you understand and then set the intention. And then the third is the practice of forgiveness. So I see it as a three-stage process. There are psychologists who write books on forgiveness practice, and I looked at one the other day. It has 20 stages in it. I think that, I guess, you write things down and you think about stuff and you make lists. And it complicates it a little bit. I mean, if some people find these kind of things helpful, but it seems to me that that's the basic process: understanding and then setting the intention. And then the practice, probably everyone is familiar with the basic practices already. Loving kindness meditation, for instance, can be seen as a forgiveness practice. The way I like to do it is to begin by sensing the weight of the anger and realize that it's not in my best interest. And really imagine what it would be like to feel the peace of mind that would happen if I'm free of this burden. And understanding that the act of forgiving is self-compassion. And decide that you're no longer willing to be a victim by continuing to allow your thoughts and memories of your offender to torment you and deprive you of happiness. So you set the compass of the heart in this way. I'm going toward forgiveness. And once you've set the compass, then you recognize what on your journey supports it and what doesn't. So the intention is there. And then one practice would be simply to focus in meditation on the specific person who has harmed you, or a specific person who's harmed you. And instead of seeing this person from the outside as an evil other, right? Instead of otherizing this person, which is a very easy, habitual, probably genetically based habit of the human mind, feel into his or her humanity. Try to understand the 10,000 causes and conditions in their life that led them to act in the unskillful way that they did. Not to make excuses for them, but to find compassion for the blindness and suffering in them that made them act toward you the way they did. You can remember the famous words of Longfellow, that if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Kind of a beautiful thought. So then the next stage would be, in your mind's eye, you can imagine the offender approaching you and even notice what it feels like as they draw closer. What happens in your body? What happens in your mind? Do you tense up? Are you uncomfortable? What happens? And speak to this person as if they're actually present and offer them forgiveness. One traditional phrase is something like, for whatever you've done, intentionally or unintentionally, through your words or your actions, that caused me pain, I now, to the best of my ability, offer you forgiveness. So you just, what you do in that third stage here is incline the mind toward forgiveness. The Buddha said, that we don't have a lot of freedom, but what we do have in the present moment is the ability to incline our mind this way or that way. So you incline the mind toward forgiveness by saying these words, even if you don't feel them. And one of two things usually happens when you do that. At least when I do that, one of two things happens. First, there's a little drop of forgiveness that I feel. Maybe that happens. And then there's a little relief. And so the practice of forgiveness is like dropping a drop of water in a bucket, It may be a tiny effect at first, but eventually the bucket starts to fill up. So that may be one thing that happens. And there's a sense of relief and peace. Or the mind does a counterattack. You get all mad. The mind, the most angry tendencies of the mind can come bubbling to the surface. And this happens a lot. Has anyone ever been on a metta retreat? Well, I don't know what your experience was like, but when I've done these retreats, what happens on metta retreats? Metta means, for anyone who doesn't know the lingo, it means loving kindness or friendliness. It's meditation that's sending loving kindness thoughts toward yourself and then toward others. And on a metta retreat, you do this all day long. Your meditation is, you start with the first day, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, all day long. May I be well, may I live in ease and well-being, all day long. And then you start moving toward other people, toward people you like, toward enemies, toward all of humanity. And so it's just, a week or 10 days of thinking nice thoughts about yourself and other people. And what typically happens to a lot of people, these are very, very difficult retreats. They're the most difficult I've ever been to. Did you? You're not. Because what tends to happen is all the negative tendencies of the mind, all the areas where we aren't loving and kind, come bubbling to the surface. So it's a purification process. So there's struggle involved in this, But I went on a metta retreat because I, especially one patient that I was working with who went to one, and he went through all that too, but he came back glowing and floating because there was this deep joy that had also welled up by the end of the retreat, and a long time family issues had resolved in his head, not between him and the other person, but he was able to let go of deep-seated resentments. So it works, but it can be struggle. So what happens is, if that happens, the resentment instead of forgiveness arises. The thing to do there is to pull back, stop focusing on the other person, and focus on sending loving kindness toward yourself. Maybe even forgiving yourself for feeling that way if you're holding it against yourself. Recognizing that this resentment you're feeling is a form of suffering and sending compassion into it. And then later, again, you do the forgiveness practice, incline the mind toward forgiveness. So it's a practice that doesn't yield immediate results. But over time, it begins, I think, to wear down at least ideally, the habits of resentment. So that's pretty much all I have to say, and then we can talk. We can have a discussion. Except I would end with the words of Ram Dass. In his practice, he said that what his practice was about is to see that there is no us and them. We're all us. When he said that, it was a long time ago. He said Nixon is us. Mao Zedong is us. We're all us. So that's an interesting meditative idea right there. But anyway, so that's all I have to say on it. And we have quite a bit of time, actually. God, I got through that fast. What do you think? Questions, comments? Want to argue about it?
First of all, thanks for wonderful insights on all of that.
Thanks.
I heard what you said about forgiving the actor but not the action.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what that, would look like to, say, a victim of a crime or something. So, for instance, they would maybe reach the point of compassion where they forgive the person, but would they still participate in the criminal justice system and testify for trial?
Yes.
And I'm not sure this second part is related or not, but the challenge of working with compassion is not falling into the near enemy of compassion, which is pity. Like, the circumstances you grew up in didn't enable you to act in a civil manner, and you don't have the ability to express yourself without anger and resorting to violence and things like that. So how do you know?
Yeah, those are good questions. For the first one first, in terms of using the legal system, you may or you may not. I mean, people can do different things, but justice is still an important value. Restitution is an important value. So you may forgive a wrong, say, as my partner and I were held up at gunpoint on the street some years back by two kids. Well, I think it was important, and they did this to about 12 other people within a short period of time. And I think it was important that they be caught so that they don't do this to other people and that they face their actions. That is not vengeance, necessarily. I mean, there can be vengeful feelings involved in that, and there certainly were for me at first. I mean, I had to work at this. So I think it's important that justice be served, and that's important. But that doesn't mean, I have to resent these people for the rest of my life and be angry and stir myself up every time I think about them. And I can understand. I mean, they did come from backgrounds where there was a lot of violence in their past. And this didn't come out of thin air. And yes, I can go in the direction of pity, which is a condescension. Poor thing. I have the solid identity of I'm just better than you, and you're less than me. I mean, that's what pity. It's definitely a form of condescension. And yeah, that is the near enemy of forgiveness, of compassion, because compassion is actually opening the heart and beginning to remove the distinction between self and other. Right, the sense of being one in the highest sense. So does that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sir.
There's a great story to add on to. There's a young, I think she was from California. She went to South Africa and she was murdered by a group of men. And her parents went to South Africa to meet these men, to forgive them, and to work with them. And that's going to take a lot of courage and a lot of forgiveness to do something like that. But to me, that's like the ultimate forgiveness.
Yeah. So when I hear stories like that, I'm inspired, that if people can do that, that means I can, even if I don't think I can. That it really is possible to have a heart, or to move our hearts deliberately, to incline our hearts in the direction of compassion. We really can do it. And it's probably the best thing we can do for ourselves and the world. So I love hearing stories like that.
Tom, I thought of two people while you were talking, Vladimir Putin and Ted Cruz. and these are, my question to you is, let's say, at least with Ted Cruz, I can get more involved in political discourse in the U.S. and, give more money to the Democratic National Committee and et cetera. With something like what I'm seeing happening in the other part of the world, I have this ongoing feeling of anger and powerlessness that I find it really hard to deal with, other than changing channels on the radio and listening to classical music instead of news.
Which is a good idea.
Any thoughts on that at that level? Forgiveness at that level?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I feel pretty much the same. I mean, both about those two gentlemen. Ted Cruz may be more than Putin, even though his crimes are not as awful, in my opinion, because he's an American and because, he represents everything I dislike about where this country is going, So, again, it's forgiving actors, not actions. I mean, I think what he's doing is demagogic and despicable. I mean, why pretend otherwise, right? I mean, we can see what he's doing. You can see how he manipulates and creates fear and so on. On and on. I mean, I'm sure there's not going to be a lot of argument about that in this room. But yes, I mean that. So it's not like we don't see clearly, right? See what actually is happening. The forgiveness part is just understanding that this is a person who is deluded, who lives in whatever, as we all do to some degree, in our own ways, greed, hatred, and delusion, and acts from those and to understand that this is how the world is. This is what we've got to work with here, And to the degree that you can, it actually, I find it on this metta retreat, to send loving kindness and forgiveness to people who are in this camp. And there's a bunch of them, right? We all have thousands of them, to send loving kindness toward them, to wish that they find the way out of suffering too. And the thing about feeling powerless, well, we are. I mean, I can't. What can we do to change Putin? I mean, if he's going to change us, I don't see that there's anything I can do. And that's a very hard reality to live with for us. I think for men especially, to see the various ways in which we're powerless can be very hard, and we can hold it against ourselves. And that's where some self-forgiveness comes in, some acceptance of, there's me, and there's the universe, and the universe is bigger, right? I mean, it's basic facts of reality that we have to come to terms with. What do you think? Sir?
So bringing it away from the dictators and the murderers. So if you're in a relationship with someone where there has been something that you needed to forgive, and that person also has to forgive themselves, and the relationship has a reconciliation component, so you're still in each other's space going forward. Speaking for myself, I've come up against a line where I still feel the other person doesn't 100% understand their actions in terms of its impact, but we're sort of graduated from the forgiveness phase, and so now I would be bringing it up and I think rattling the cage of that person's new consciousness. And I wonder if there's a pathway to do it that's respectful, but kind of add some clarity to it, since we have decided to continue to be in each other's lives.
Well, that's a really good question. I wish I had a really good answer for it. Because I've been there many times too, on both sides of that equation. So why would you need, what do you need further? I mean, the person's admitted they're wrong, but hasn't accepted that he doesn't see the real gravity of what he did, or?
I think there was a choice to be made that we could hash it out forever, or we could move to higher ground. But there's a sense that the higher ground has a little bit of, I think it would be a richer higher ground if there could be a little bit more understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think all you could really ask for is just to have some concentrated periods where we discuss this again in a kind of safe way,
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't lose the accomplishments so far. But on the other hand, if there was some sort of really rainbow forgiveness, maybe I would feel that it's just not worth it, and there's plenty of other things in life to feel richness from. However, I can't shake the feeling that there's something slightly hollow about the lack of true comprehension about what actually happened.
Yes, yes. So really there are two things to forgive there. There's the original wrong, and then the fact that the person does not completely comprehend the wrong they committed.
Well, I think that if we could have more frank discussions about it, they have the intellectual faculties to understand it, it would just be a risk-reward proposition.
Yeah.
Do we have these discussions that may impact or even sabotage the higher ground, or do we just live without them?
Yeah, so that's where wisdom comes in.
Give me some.
No, I mean, in your situation, I mean, this is where we're being quiet and seeing, I know this person, what is the likely outcome of this behavior? Am I just going to be digging a deeper hole, or is the person open and willing to hearing my point of view? And that is something you have to decide based on your knowledge of the other person, I think. So, and it may be that, so you're going to stay, you're reconciled, you're going to stay together. It may be that part of what you have to forgive is the other person's incomprehension, that the other person may never completely understand what I want them to understand. Well, as I talk, my husband's here today, we've had these, I'm sure he has them with me, there are things I just don't get that he has to forgive me for.
I was just thinking about that.
We'll talk. And same with me. I mean, I think in any relationship, you have to deal with these kind of things. John Gottman, who's one of the leading couple counselors in the nation, has a really important statement that kind of always hits me between the eyes. He said, to take on a relationship is to take on a set of problems. It's true, right?
Well, that's actually, I would reject, I don't want. I would want to see it as a series of opportunities. So it definitely would have to be a glass half full thing to take on.
Yeah, okay.
I think that I would add that my instinct is that it also depends on timing.
Similar.
If you want to have a discussion with someone going, in the scenario that I elaborated on, that timing is important. There would have to be a right time and a wrong time to revisit something.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where the wisdom part comes in. When do you talk? When are you able to do it in a compassionate way? When is the person able to hear it and be receptive? And it can boil down to what time of day, what's going on, what else is going on in their lives, what stress is going on, or in your life. And that's where you have to be skillful, and what that means, is very individual and very personal. As far as opportunities go, I'd stay with. I mean, we can disagree. I mean, I would say that to take on a relationship is to take on some problems, some which are never resolved, some that you find a way to deal with acceptance and humor about each other. One person's messy, one person's neat. That's a simple picture, but. And it can't continue. In most relationships, there's something that bugs you about the other person that they just never seem to be able to change, no matter how much they should. And they have that about you, too. Do you? Really? Maybe? Yeah? And so what Gottman says, basically, is you don't talk these things to death. You learn to deal with them with acceptance and with humor. Now, the thing you're talking about it sounds deeper than that, but it still is true, I think, that there are issues in relationships that don't get resolved. I remember hearing Eugene Cash, who he is, the Spirit Rock teacher. He was on his Sunday night group one time. He was talking about his wife, who's a Zen teacher, And he said, relationships are dukkha. He just let that out. Dukkha means suffering or stress or pervasive unsatisfactoriness. And it's a very unromantic view of relationships. And they aren't just dukkha, but I think he was pointing out something that is really, really unromantic but true about relationships. They aren't, it's not true that love will always find a way, and that relationships or love is the answer to all human suffering. And I wish it were true. I just haven't found it so. And yet it's worth loving anyway. It's definitely worth doing.
Are you saying sex was bad too?
No. Does that sound depressing or? Yeah, a little negative. Yeah, I can see how it's not a very romantic view of relationships. It's certainly not what I would have thought when I was 25. But at 66, and I'm committed to my husband. I'm very committed. I'm so happy we're together. But there are these realities which I think, are real. In the real world, it's kind of like that, in my opinion. But who knows? Any more?
Feel a little bit of wisdom.
A little wisdom. Good, sir.
I was thinking about what you said about wisdom with regard to, having a sense of what's possible with regard to the person you're working out things with. And I'm wondering if it seems like the way you describe it, there would be a fine line between, ruminative speculation and what you're calling wisdom in that regard.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could say something about that fine line.
Oh, don't ruminate.
But you're sitting there trying to figure out,
Yeah.
Is this possible, or is this person ready to hear this, or will it be good to talk about this thing?
Yeah.
If that's the wisdom you're looking for in your heart, in that silence, or in that meditation.
Ruminating, the term rumination, the root word of that is, the root meaning of that word is chewing the cud. It refers to a cow. And when we find ourselves grinding on things, it's usually not helpful, right? Even though we all do it. Or worrying, Worry is not preparation most of the time. So I really think, one of the practices that can be really helpful when trying to make a decision like that is to ask the question, is it time, or can I bring this up? How do I bring it up skillfully? And then to be quiet, to meditate, and that doesn't always work either. I mean, then you do some stupid thing after meditating sometimes. But you're more likely to behave skillfully if you don't find your ego grinding on it and trying to figure out what's the best way to do stuff all the time. I don't find that very productive personally. Someone else has their hand back there. Over here. You knew.
I don't know if this is theoretical, but in my mind, I'm thinking sometimes when a situation comes up, and whether you're talking about somebody like Putin or someone with whom you're having a working relationship or a personal relationship, sometimes, yes, you can forgive the actor, but not the act. But very often when you're trying to do some effective kind of problem solving, it's important to be clear about consequences that happens if that actor continues to succeed to act as they did before. And how compatible is that with your ability to have really forgive it?
Well, that speaks to the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. When somebody's this woman I was talking about whose boyfriend was beating her up, for her to try to forgive him while he's still beating her up, puts the cart before the horse. She has to be in a position of safety first. That's the first order of business. Establish your own safety. Then you can talk about the steps. And so if a perpetrator is doing ongoing perpetration, then you have to do what you can to protect yourself from it or to stop it if you can. Does that address your
Right, but
question.
I'm trying to figure out in my mind how on the one hand, I can hold a sense of forgiveness towards someone, but at the same time, hold watchfulness as we proceed in the future
Yeah.
to determine whether or not consequences will be executed.
Yeah, that's exactly what you have to do, what you just said. I mean, that's why I said, being forgiving does not mean being a damn fool, right? It doesn't mean being Pollyanna-ish. It involves being realistic, at least really grounded forgiveness does. Seeing the world as it is and seeing people as they are.
Actually, I guess I was going to make a comment which is just different words from what you just said, but tell me if this is particularly in Buddhist thought, from my experience of problems with people. I think you've touched a nerve with a lot of people here. That when harm's been done, I get to the point of forgiveness, and then you decide whether that relationship should continue at all or not. And I thought of it as, if you decide yes, if I decide yes, then move forward with what I think of as qualified reconciliation. And I think that the forgiveness is complete, but I also recognize what's happened in the past. And so, I've learned over years of hard experience that you can't make somebody else do anything, even though you know much better what they should do.
Right. I found that too.
And you need to let people be themselves, and so you can go forward with this with the recognition that it may not turn out completely the way you want, the way you would prefer, so that people will be as they are, and if that is still reinforcing and adding to your life, then that's worth pursuing. Otherwise, not.
Yeah, part of forgiveness is also accepting the imperfections of people and of oneself. And I like the term conditional reconciliation too.
Qualified reconciliation.
Or qualified. The qualified. Because it's like that sometimes. We can do this, but we can't do it. We can spend an hour together, we can't spend 3 days together. Stuff like that. Makes sense to me. Oh, I also didn't say, one thing I didn't say about, are we out of time?
Yeah. No, we have plenty of time.
Is that in terms of forgiveness, the timing has to be right for the forgiver too. If, like this woman who was being beaten up by her boyfriend, so she throws him out of the house, and the next day while she's still bruised and battered, to preach forgiveness to her would be destructive. It's not time. It's right. She needs her anger at that point. She needs her, thank you, sorry, Buddha, the simile of the saw. In the real world, she needs her feelings, and they need to be respected and listened to. And that's an important part of the recovery process. So you have to also know when it's time to forgive, when it's something you could do realistically. And I think to preach forgiveness to people can be really harmful to them. You should forgive and forget. I remember hearing a patient one time talk about his awful abusive father. Every time his father beat him up or got rid of his dog to punish him one time, the mother would say, "You have to be like Jesus on the cross and forgive." Well, so he grew up hating Jesus, right? Had a severe resentment toward Jesus. It doesn't, that's not how, it's not the way to go.
I just want to make a comment, which is that it seems like I'm thankful for the way you've created this process of discernment about forgiveness, with regard to reconciliation and all the other things. And it seems that if somebody has been introduced to this process before they are wronged, so to speak, like this woman, for example, that there's a higher possibility that in their anger they just have a notion that forgiveness is down the line and that could help. Do you know what I mean? Like that, I may not forgive now, but there's still this like understanding that that's a thing.
Yes.
And I can see that in this process of discernment right now, it's coming.
I've experienced that. I can't do it today, and I have to accept and forgive myself maybe for that fact. But yeah, that's what the compass of my heart wants to go.
In an odd way, there's forgiveness in that.
Yes. Right there. Yes, that's really good. I like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
You had your hand? Oh, over here.
So, this is very good, thank you. I'm thinking of a situation where I have no interest in reconciling because the person really doesn't deserve to be in my life, and I don't want him to be in my life. But the wound was so deep that though everything you say makes great sense, there's just a part of me that feels like I'm going to lose too much. I do forgiveness meditation and metta for this person, and there's just a part of me that will not or is not willing to let go, and it's too scary.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that out loud. I think I understand it. Maybe someday I will, but I just wonder if you have a comment about that.
I completely understand, and I'm there too with some things, and was there with some things, and then all of a sudden one day it burned away like fog. It's very mysterious. There's a certain amount of grace that's involved in this too. I think it's great that you do these forgiveness practices and metta practices. That's beautiful.
It's clear that I'm the only one who's suffering. I don't know if he's even alive. I just get that very clearly intellectually, but I'll say the prayer and the results are imperfect. It's just a little less anger, a little less frustration. I don't think quite as much. So maybe that's
it.
Part of the process.
Yeah, that you're headed in the right direction. One of my favorite practices is a Tibetan practice where you imagine your benefactors, that is, people who have loved you at least at some point pretty unconditionally. Imagine them arrayed behind you. And then you recall the suffering, like the suffering of how you feel about this guy, and that you feel. And then you recognize that it's suffering, and then you imagine that these people can see what you're feeling and are sending compassion into your suffering, not in any way to change it, but to hold you in it. It's a very soothing practice, because sometimes imagining other people sending compassion is a great way to jumpstart your own, and also to practice forgiveness for yourself. I simply can't go there, and I think I ought to. Well, that's harsh. No. Forgive oneself for that kind of judgment.
What do you suppose it is about us, or me, that, I don't think it's just me, but it makes us just want to, it's not that trait.
I don't know. I think vengeance is deeply ingrained in human nature. There are evolutionary theories about it. Most of those kind of theories are ad hoc, though. I don't know, but it's certainly, if you look at the world, it's very easy to go there. And to go to this, like the simile of the saw, who can really do that? It's a beautiful ideal, but forgiveness is in many ways swimming against the current of our own mental tendencies. Don't you think?
Yes, I do. That's why I asked. Why?
Yeah.
Why are we so screwed up?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Sir?
Tom, I really like the way you introduce time as an element of this.
Yeah.
Because we hear the adage, time heals all wounds. But
yes, that's not
by
true.
Itself is not true. It's an ingredient in the recipe. But if you just let something sit and sit and sit, it could go to, forgiveness could arise, the fog could burn away, or you could go into, the opposite where you're just hanging on to it. But it seems like there's a time component to all three of the things that you mentioned. The wisdom comes in time, the inclination or the intention. You reach a point where okay, I'm ready to set the intention, and then the actual practice. So they all have, there's timing for all of that.
Yeah, it is And it isn't true that time heals all wounds. Especially in the case of, I'm thinking about grief right now. There are people who feel, they're mourning a loss of somebody like 4 years later, say. There's just hurting, and but they've heard about the stages of grief, This, it's like running around the bases, and your goal is acceptance, that you're supposed to go through these stages. It's so American, this idea. The reality is some grief does last a lifetime. Some grief does. Anger, too. I mean, if you've been wrong, it can fester for a lifetime. Hopefully these kind of practices can help that not happen. But sometimes, given who we are, given our capacities, it can be quite a time-consuming, slow process. And that's how we are. That's how it is.
Okay, Tom, I think we're running out of time. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And are you going to be able to stay around for the Our Socials? So, if anybody has extra questions or comments, then we can do it at that time. So, a few announcements. First of all, the Dana Bowl, with the way that we can pay for the rent for this place and do various other good deeds that are done, like the correspondence with people that are behind bars, as well as the luncheons and so forth that we provide occasionally for the Martin Street group. There's next week we're going to have Dagan Gaither, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. The Reverend Dagan Gaither began Buddhist practice in 1995 in the Vipassana tradition, and then began to study Zen in 2003 with Ryushin Paul Hiller Roshi. He received a lay ordination in 2006 when he was given the name Daigan, or Great Vow. He received priest ordination in July 2011. His work practice and free time includes many hours devoted to community service in a variety of ways, including his work as one of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Yeah, so it can be a fun guy too. And as a volunteer at the Zen Hospice Project. He has spoken nationwide on a variety of issues and has sat on a number of boards and committees that serve the community. So it should be an interesting talk next week. Do we have any other announcements?
I'm your host today, so please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. There's some treats that are all vegan, and there's hot water for tea, so if you do have tea, please wash your cup with hot soapy water. There's a sign-up sheet for anybody who wants to add their name to the mailing list. It's on the credenza over to the right. And at 12:30, I will be coming around with the Dom Bowl. And at 12:30, some people gather at the front door to go out to have lunch together, and anybody is welcome to join.
Oh, and I forgot to add that our suggested donation is $10 or more, if you can afford it. For the
There is still some space available for our annual retreat. There's a flyer out on the credenza there. It's September 19th through the 21st, so check it out.
Okay, well now it's time to all hands and do our dedication of marathon.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.